You might think you know the history of a nation's intelligence, right? How it protects interests, gathers secrets. But what if the very foundations were built on, well, little more than hasty sketches, with organizations learning by making really costly mistakes, often getting tangled up in secrets, deceptions, and, frankly, unintended consequences? It's quite a thought, isn't it, considering the untold stories behind the global events that shaped our world?
It really is. That idea challenges the whole myth of this perfectly oiled intelligence machine. The thought that such a vital institution could start with such basic blueprints. It says a lot about its flaws and maybe sometimes its resilience, too.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into a truly fascinating and, yeah, often controversial book, Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA. And just so you know, what you're experiencing right now is a unique two-voice AI conversation. It's powered by Google's NotebookLM, aiming for a deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
And Weiner, well, he doesn't pull any punches in this book. It's a raw, unflinching look at the origins and the very tumultuous evolution of American intelligence.
Definitely. And hey, for more insightful AI book analysis designed to inspire reflection and rational thought, remember, you can find Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel. But for now, let's get into this surprisingly almost fumbling birth of the CIA.
Right. So after World War II, you've got the British Empire collapsing. Suddenly, the United States finds itself facing a massive new adversary. Soviet communism, there was this desperate need to understand the enemy, to give presidents foresight to fight fire with fire, as they said. It was immediate, overwhelming. But the initial plan for this new agency was, like the book says, a hasty sketch, secrecy, deception. They just weren't really American strengths back then, not established practices.
So, okay, this desperate need arises. Where do they look? To the past, right? But before the CIA, there was the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and its legacy. Well, it wasn't exactly stellar, more like a cautionary tale, maybe. The training was apparently crude and loosely organized, and British commanders, they saw American spies as, get this, putty in their hand.
Putty in their hands. Imagine that. Your supposed allies looking at you like that.
Yeah.
And the consequences weren't just theoretical, they were immediate, devastating. For instance, the Japanese embassy in Lisbon. They found out about OSS plans to steal code books. Result, a complete blackout of vital military information in 43.
Wow.
And even worse, tragically, faulty OSS intelligence after Rome fell in 44. It led directly to a Nazi trap on Elba.
Okay.
About 1,100 French troops were killed. The price of bad intelligence was paid right there in human lives.
That's brutal. So a royally bitched up beginning, as President Truman's budget director, Harold Smith, actually put it. Pretty blunt language.
Extremely blunt. Smith was worried the U.S. was slipping back to its pre-Pearl Harbor innocence after they dismantled the OSS. It left this huge vacuum. And Admiral Leahy, Truman's military chief of staff, he told the president straight up, intelligence had been handled in a disgraceful way.
It really begs the question then, how do you even start building a proper intelligence agency from scratch with that kind of background?
Well, the book describes this almost comical scene, the investiture of Sidney Sowers, as the first director of Central Intelligence, the DCI. Truman apparently presented him and Admiral Leahy with actual black cloaks, black hats, and woody daggers.
No way.
Yes, and he knighted Sowers as chief of the Cloak and Dagger group of snoopers.
That sounds like something out of a bad movie, almost farcical, considering what was at stake.
Totally, and Sowers' first reaction, apparently he just wanted to go home. So you have this agency starting with nearly 2,000 officers and staff who, according to the book, basically had no idea what they were doing.
Astonishing. A critical national security mission, and the people in charge are essentially lost.
And this immediately set up a major conflict within the early agency. You see, President Truman wanted a daily intelligence digest, basically a newspaper for him. Quick, easy to read.
A president's newspaper, yeah.
But real espionage, that's slow, deliberate. You're stealing state secrets, not reporting daily news. So this pressure for immediate reporting, it clashed fundamentally with the nature of real spying. It distorted the mission right from the start.
And those early blind spots you mentioned, they were massive, weren't they?
Huge. Imagine, a big chunk of the intelligence on the Soviet Union was just pure falsehood.
Yeah.
There were actual factories of fake intelligence running in Berlin and Vienna.
Factories? Seriously?
Seriously. Richard Helms, who later became DCI, figured out that over half the info the CIA had on the Soviet Union was just fabricated. The really startling thing isn't just the mistakes, it's that a core part of national security was built on such unreliable stuff. And that problem, that vulnerability, it echoed for decades, right up to the search for WMDs in Iraq.
Incredible. Yet somehow, even with all this chaos and bad intel, they got funding.
Oh, yeah. Colonel Quinn, who was in charge of covert ops, went to Congress, spun this stirring tale about a cleaning woman spy in Berlin photographing Soviet documents. He got $15 million under the table.
Just like that.
Just like that. And even bigger, 5% of Marshall Plan counterpart funds were diverted for covert operations. Now, counterpart funds, for anyone listening, were local currencies generated when European countries sold the goods we supplied through the Marshall Plan.
So basically a giant, untraceable slush fund.
Exactly. As one administrator put it, we had counterpart funds just coming out of our ears. The money was definitely there, even if the strategy wasn't quite solid yet.
Okay, this is where it gets really intriguing, right? Moving into the era of covert action, heavily influenced by Alan Dulles. The book calls him a strange kind of genius, devoted to covert action, but maybe with a disdain for the details of analysis, and disturbingly, a dangerous practice of deceiving the president.
That's right. Dulles truly believed in the magic of covert action. And the 1953 Iran coup, where money changed hands and the regime changed, that seemed to prove his point, at least on the surface.
That fueled the perception, yeah.
Then came Guatemala. Operation Success, they called it. Just $150,000 bought 3 old Thunderbolts. They strafed, they bombed, created a terror campaign. At the time, these were hailed as brilliant successes. But really, they created this extravagant impression of CIA power, often based on what the book calls marginal assistance.
But underneath that shiny surface, that illusion of success, there was serious trouble inside, right? Internal rot.
Absolutely. Young officers were seeing a shocking amount of money just wasted on missions that were largely ineffectual and incredibly expensive. The honest assessment from inside. The agency was shot through with mediocrity and less. A stark contrast to the public image of this all-powerful entity.
And that internal environment, did it lead to darker things?
It did. It led to some really disturbing practices, pushing ethical lines way too far. Project Artichoke, for example, secret prisons, forcing drugs on people for questioning, and the records, later destroyed by senior officers like Helms.
Destroyed records makes you wonder what else was buried.
Exactly. And the famous Berlin Tunnel, supposedly tapping Soviet lines. The Kremlin knew about it from day one because of a mole, George Blake. Moscow let it run for 11 months, which raises a really chilling question. Were they feeding the U.S. deceptive information through it the whole time?
Wow. And the deceptions, or maybe miscalculations, they went right to the top, didn't they? The missile gap.
Oh, the missile gap. The CIA fueled that big time. They estimated the Soviets would have 500 ICBMs by 1961, the actual number. 4. Just 4.
4 versus 500. That's not just wrong. That's
wildly wrong. Then the U-2 spy plane gets shot down. The cover-up completely shattered the idea of plausible deniability, that the president could credibly deny knowing about covert ops. Eisenhower later called the lie about the U-2 the greatest regret of his presidency. It fundamentally broke that wall between secrets and presidential knowledge.
So connecting this all together, this era also forced some tough moral choices, didn't it? Working with unsavory characters.
Oh, definitely. The desperate hunt for Soviet intelligence meant working with people like Mykola Lebed, a convicted war criminal. The justification was stark. Any son of a bitch was useful against Stalin. Because often these emigre groups, even with dubious pasts, were the only option besides doing nothing. It shows the compromises made in the Cold War heat.
Okay, so the agency grows, it matures, but then it hits maybe its most public, most humiliating failure. The Bay of Pigs.
Oh, the Bay of Pigs. Catastrophic. A really personal blow to the Kennedys. Robert Kennedy made overthrowing Castro the absolute top priority. There's this quote from a CIA officer, Grayston Lynch. He wrote, "For the first time, I was ashamed of my country. The impact on morale, on the agency's standing was just profound."
Did that failure lead to any attempts at reform?
It created an opening, yeah. John McConney became the new DCI. He fundamentally believed the CIA was unfit to run a war. He argued it needed to get back to its fundamental responsibility, assembling intelligence, analyzing it, evaluating it for the White House, not being a cloak and dagger outfit, trying to topple regimes or assassinate leaders. He really pushed for a return to core intelligence work.
But even with McConnell pushing for that, they still got caught flat-footed by the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Pretty much. A near-total intelligence surprise. Even though McConney himself had warned about Soviet missiles in Cuba, the agency as a whole failed to get across the most accurate possible picture. It showed real gaps in agent coverage, in aerial surveillance. Even with good intentions at the top, the system struggled with its basic mission.
And then came Vietnam. Was the intelligence situation there even worse?
Oh, Vietnam was a whole different level of unraveling. Early ops like Project Tiger, just costly failures. They dropped 250 South Vietnamese agents into the north.
Yeah.
Result, 217 killed, missing, or turned into double agents. A terrible human cost for nothing.
Just tragic waste. And the Diem coup. The CIA was deeply involved there, too.
Deeply. And problematically. Ambassador Lodge in Saigon apparently resented the CIA's exalted status, its bigger budget, how it seemed to run its own foreign policy, and it ended brutally. Diem and his brother assassinated after a general gave the signal, kill them both. Then you have the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the very thing that authorized the wider war, based on, as the NSA admitted years later, political lies based on fake intelligence. The whole foundation for the war was flawed from the start.
It's staggering. And they were gathering tons of intel in Vietnam.
Right.
Documents, interrogations.
Vast amounts. But here's the paradox. The more intelligence they gathered, the more they realized how little they knew. President Johnson was constantly frustrated, fighting this enemy he couldn't see, which led to calls not for better analysis, but for opinion manipulation and political persuasion, basically, using intelligence to manufacture support for the war.
And maybe the most disturbing part of this era was the domestic spying, Operation Chaos.
That was a blatant violation of the CIA's charter, no question. Director Helms, under pressure from LBJ, started spying on American peace groups. They built a computer index with 300,000 names of American people, organizations, worked secretly with police departments inside the U.S. This wasn't just a mistake, it was illegal. A fundamental breach.
Which leads us right into this period of deep crisis, cover-ups, Nixon's frustration.
Intense frustration. Nixon apparently raged, what the hell do those clowns do out there in Langley? He couldn't stand people lying to him about intelligence, made a mental note, get rid of Richard Helms. That's a dangerous dynamic between a president and his DCI.
And his anger wasn't entirely baseless, looking back at Chile.
No, the CIA's involvement in Chile was deep. From supporting Frey initially to actively opposing Allende later, that Track 2 operation. It started with trying to buy votes in their Congress, but escalated shockingly to the agency, smuggling automatic weapons to would-be assassins, including the plot targeting General Schneider, who was ultimately killed. A terrifying escalation.
And then Watergate happens, and the CIA gets dragged in.
Right. Through former employees involved in the break-in, Nixon then tried to use the agency to help cover it up. Helms made this absolutely critical decision. Protect the CIA, not Nixon. That decision had huge consequences for the agency's public image and raised serious questions about oversight.
So all this secrecy, these operations, how did it eventually come out? The Horrors book?
Yes. The Family Jewels, sometimes called the Horrors book, compiled internally at DCI Schlesinger's command. It laid bare everything: domestic spying, wiretapping journalists, illegal searches, opening mail, mind control experiments, even assassination plots. President Ford, despite being on intelligence committees for years, was apparently shocked. Said if this stuff got out, dead cats will come out. It's stunning to think this was the reality inside an agency meant to protect the nation. What does that say about unchecked power?
It's a chilling question. And then came Aldrich Ames, a betrayal from within.
A devastating betrayal. Ames was described as an alcoholic malcontent who somehow failed upward into a key position, chief of counterintelligence to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. He spied for the Soviets for nearly 9 years, betrayed almost every important spy behind the Iron Curtain. It was an unprecedented attack on the CIA, revealing deep structural dry rot in their human intelligence.
The hits just kept coming. Ron Condon.
William Casey is DCI under Reagan. His motto seemed to be, if it's secret, it's legal. He funded covert wars with foreign money. It led to that comic book fiasco where CIA training manuals advising the Contras on basically how to murder village leaders became public, and the whole arms for hostages deal with Iran. Casey managed it, refused to ever admit it was treason. Just scandalous.
Looking at this whole period, it feels like something shifted fundamentally. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex.
And the book argues that evolved, especially after 9/11, into a massive $50 billion a year intelligence industrial complex. It wasn't just more money, it was a cultural shift. The book talks about the green badge bosses, retired CIA officers, coming back as highly paid contractors, even recruiting inside the CIA cafeteria. It raises huge questions about accountability, the line between public service and private profit.
And throughout all this, the book makes a pretty stark conclusion about intelligence itself.
Yeah, a really striking conclusion that intelligence often seems to have relatively little impact on the policies that we've made over the years. The argument is that political leaders usually come into office with their own baggage, their own agendas, and aren't necessarily swayed by intelligence reports, even accurate ones. A persistent disconnect.
So the Cold War ends. What challenges did that lower? A new landscape.
A completely new landscape. The CIA went from fighting one big dragon, the Soviet Union, to navigating a jungle filled with poisonous snakes. New, fragmented threats, terrorism, ethnic conflicts, much harder to pin down.
But did the old habits, the systemic problems, just disappear? Srebrenica seems like a terrible example.
A terrible example of old problems in a new context. The CIA had U-2 spy plane images showing freshly dug mass graves near Srebrenica. But initially, they reported no information about any atrocities. Why? Because their entire focus was on supporting military operations, not analyzing for war crimes. The analysis reached the White House way too late. A critical failure of priority with horrific human cost.
George Tenet comes in as DCI later, trying to fix things.
He tried desperately to save the CIA. He inherited an agency that was, according to the book, nearly bankrupt and in disarray. He shifted the focus hard towards terrorism, but often the reports were threat-heavy, based sometimes on just single agents. He himself later said, "In the absence of hard intelligence, covert action is a fool's game." A lesson learned the hard way, echoing the past.
Which brings us, tragically, to Iraq and the WMDs, a massive intelligence failure.
Profound. The CIA essentially confirmed White House claims about WMDs, despite having, as the book says, less than a handful of actual Iraqi sources. They produced a ton of analysis from an ounce of intelligence. Defectors like this guy codenamed Curveball. He told these unbelievably good stories.
But they weren't true.
None of it was true. Yet this shaky intelligence became the basis for Colin Powell's famous presentation to the UN, where he asserted facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence, which turned out to be almost all wrong. The magnitude of that error reshaped the world.
What was the cost inside the agency after that?
Immense. A real moral exhaustion, a dark, bitter anger settled over the CIA. President Bush himself started to stain their reports, apparently saying the agency was just guessing. Tenet later admitted, "We were prisoners of our own history," suggesting past failures maybe skewed their analysis of Iraq.
And this led to internal backlash.
Big time. There was the Goss report, warning the clandestine service was becoming a stilted bureaucracy incapable of even the slightest bit of success. You had senior CIA veterans publicly criticizing their own DCI, warning that purging the CIA is cutting off our nose to spite our face. Deep divisions, a real crisis of confidence.
So the struggle continues then?
Absolutely. The book makes it clear the persistent struggle is to deliver honest, analytical product without facing the risk of political contention. And there's this candid admission from within the agency, one that kind of sums up this whole messy history. Intelligence failure is inevitable.
So reflecting on all this, what does it really mean for you listening right now? This book, Legacy of Ashes, paints this incredibly complex, often contradictory picture of the CIA. From those, well, almost farcical beginnings, through times of immense power and terrible failures, to trying to reform in a new world. Its history is really a testament to the huge challenges of intelligence in a democracy.
It really pushes us, doesn't it, to think about what these stories mean for how we understand information, how it's gathered, analyzed, and often used or misused by powerful institutions. This history has to inform how we look at current events, and it really highlights that constant, critical need for independent thought, for scrutiny.
Absolutely. And remember, for more insightful AI book analyses like this, designed to spark reflection and rational thought, check out Mindful Moments on our YouTube channel. And please explore our other podcasts too for deep dives into topics shaping our world.
Yeah, we really encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you find this valuable. Share this deep dive with other people you know who are intellectually curious. And hey, consider picking up Legacy of Ashes. There's a link in the description. It's a powerful read to explore these themes further yourself.
And maybe leave you with this final thought, that enduring tension. The need for secret intelligence for national security versus the very real dangers of unchecked power and deception. Keep thinking critically about those unseen forces shaping our world.